Hello and welcome to the 110K Q&A. It's going to be a cutting Q&A, so I'm going to be answering all of your questions, 21 questions in all, about fat loss, weight loss, getting spicy and dicey. So, first question number 21. We're going to be going from the least upvoted to the most upvoted. It's a multi-part question. How did you plan to manage volume/intensity within your program? Did you change your training program at all for the cut? How have your lifting numbers been impacted on the cut? So I did not change my plan much at all. I kept it pretty much the same. I auto-regulate my volume anyway, so I'll give myself a range of sets to choose from. Could be 3 to 5, could be 2 to 3, could be 4 to 5, could be 1 to 2 even, depending on the exercise. And so if I'm tired, I will just tend to trend towards that lower side of the volume. So I didn't change my training program at all. My lifting numbers, bench is down about 5%, maybe 10%, somewhere around there. But I think this is pretty normal. For a barbell bench press, you don't realize sometimes that you're actually getting worse leverages. As you lose fat from your chest, as you lose fat from your back, as you lose fat from around your shoulders, around your elbows, you're getting worse leverages. You just have less padding around the joints, and you're actually increasing the range of motion. So if your bench press maintains, it means your bench press is actually getting better, because when you go back to that bulk state, it is almost certainly going to improve. Other lifts seem to be much less impacted. I'm as strong as I've ever been on overhead press. RDLs, I'm as strong as I've ever been as well. Those have been progressing well. Probably because I'm returning from the QL injury, so I'm sort of regaining progress from before. Squat patterns are down. Again, with a pushing movement, with the fat around the joints, you're actually better leveraged when you're in a bulk state. So when you cut down, it seems like pushes, especially barbell, as well as squats, are the most impacted. Everything else seems to be either slightly up or flatlined. So curls, isolations, extensions, rows are up. Pull-ups are up as well because you're moving less body weight. And so I've maintained my muscle mass pretty well. All right, question number 20. Do you use refeeds? If so, by how much, how often, and how do you structure them? So I've used them for the past month or so, and they do seem to have stimulated progress, gotten things moving again. I think the main thing is going to be adherence, though. They keep you stricter during the week, and then you have one bigger day or one bigger meal on the weekends. I tend to prefer to prioritize carbs here, just because with carbs, you could refill the glycogen that you were losing through the cardio, through the increased activity, through the training. Whereas if you refeed with fat, I really don't think you're getting that much out of it. I don't think you're really boosting your metabolism nearly as much. It's debatable if refeeds are even going to impact metabolism at all, but I really do think that carbs make way more sense compared to refeeding with fat. Your fat intake is probably going to go up during a refeed anyway, just because you're increasing the food intake, but I think trying to keep it relatively quote-unquote clean and higher carb, lower fat is probably the best idea. But I do want to emphasize that I haven't used them long enough to really have a fully formed opinion on them. Usually if I make a whole video on something, I want to use it for many months, if not years, before I actually, know what I think about this. So for me, this is early days yet. Also, they're not really going to be necessary until you are quite lean. If you're 30% body fat going down to 20% body fat, you probably don't need refeeds. You probably just need a healthier overall diet and better adherence. And refeeds or cheat meals, probably not a whole lot of benefit here. All right, question 19. What are your starting calories, and how did your calorie intakes change over the course of your cut? Did you have to decrease them dramatically? And how did your rate of weight loss change over the course of your cut? So I actually didn't count. I didn't count at all. I didn't count macros. I didn't count calories. I didn't, try to aim for a certain number. I don't have any numbers in mind at all. I more or less went instinctively. I made better food choices. I allowed myself to be slightly hungry at times. I increased my activity levels, but I did not count, so I couldn't tell you how many calories I am eating. I have some rough numbers in mind, but I'm not even going to throw those out there because they could be wrong. I didn't really seem to have to change things much over time. There were a few sort of road bumps in the road. I got the bug in December, and then after that I decided just to maintain until I went to my wife's hometown. I didn't track for 2 weeks, so those were definitely things that got in the way. Life isn't perfect. And then when I came back, I restarted creatine, which caused a little bit of a weight bump where I was visibly getting leaner, but I was gaining weight slightly. And so, sometimes the scale will not be the whole picture. All right, question 18. Is it reasonable to cut for as long as pro bodybuilders do, up to 24 weeks? When cutting, should there be an ideal target weight in mind, or mainly looking for a downward trend? What is the ideal amount of time to cut for? So you probably don't need to cut for 24 weeks unless you are quite obese, in which case, you might need to cut for a whole year. I would, however, break that into phasic chunks where you have sort of diet breaks and maintenance periods in between, perhaps every 10% of body weight or so, just because that is going to set you up for success in the long term. But if you're just going from like 20% body fat down to 12% body fat, yeah, you don't need to cut for 24 weeks. That is probably just going to be a waste of time. The reason why professional natural bodybuilders cut for so long is because they are getting dick skin lean, and they have to do that. They have to go slowly, especially when you're under 10% body fat, or else you just hemorrhage muscle. And as for a target weight in mind, you can maybe go back to previous bulks and cuts to see what is going to be realistic. For example, last cut, I got down to 85, and so the cut after that, I had, maybe 88 kilos in mind, like a little bit heavier, and so I stopped it a little bit before that. And then this cut, I'm looking leaner earlier. So you want to look back at previous cuts and sort of get an estimation of where you want to be, depending on how lean you want to be, assuming you're just trying to potentiate future bulks. All right, next question, 17. What do you eat on a typical day of cutting? And then there's a little bit more to the question, but I think that's the gist of it. I tend to increase my fruit intake as well as my vegetable intake. I tend to cut down on starches, so a lot less bread, a lot less rice. Not because those foods are bad, just because they're highly palatable and they are easy to overeat. It's not like I cut out sugar entirely. If I want something, I have it, but I do limit it a little bit more, and I am more conscious of what I eat. That and having lean protein is going to be the basis of my diet. So basically, fruits, vegetables, leaner meats. Fat is quite calorically dense, and therefore it's not going to be a high priority in my diet when I'm cutting. I prefer high carb, low fat compared to the opposite. So eggs, chicken, fish, broccoli, blueberries, tomatoes, been eating guavas recently. Can't go wrong with a good guava, am I right? All right, next question, sort of an interesting one. Question, does fat distribution correlate to your ability to put on muscle? Maybe. So if you are putting on belly fat very easily when you're bulking, well, that means that the energy going to fat is energy not going to muscle. So it could be your sleep, it could be your stress, maybe your training just sucks, etc. Genetics also probably or almost certainly plays a role here, but don't blame that. There are probably other things you're doing as well. But I'm not sure of any studies or any kind of hard information that says, oh, if you put on fat on your belly, it means you're not going to gain muscle. If you are putting, love handles on, it means you're not going to be as gifted for muscle growth. If you look at, some powerlifters, some strong men, a lot of them do put on significant amounts of belly fat, but they're also putting on significant amounts of muscle as well. So I guess the answer is maybe / I don't know. Question 15, your abs look a lot better from your previous cut photos. What did you do to grow them? Yeah, actually that is going to be a full video. I've been training them up. I've been doing exercises, isolations, etc. I think I still have a long way to go, but they are improved. And it's good to know that other people can see the progress as well. But that is going to be a full video in the near to moderate term future that will have the full details. All right, question 14. After reaching your peak bulk, did you maintain it for a little bit? Little bits.
You hungry? Come on down.
Little bit. Or did you go right back into cutting? I maintained it a little bit, but it wasn't intentional, nor was it a strict fixed number. It was more like, okay, now I'm in a fed state, I'm full, now I'm just going to focus on training and I'm not going to worry about pushing the body weight up or cutting or anything like that. It was kind of just like a recomp, and training always has to be the focus, right? The point of a bulk is to help your training. And if you're already in a place where you don't actually want to eat any more food, you're most likely not going to get that much more out of a bulk, especially if you're up towards 20, 21, 22% body fat or whatever it was that I ended the bulk at. So once you're at that point, yeah, I'm happy to maintain, and that is where the most productive training is. Not just on the way up, but when you're in that fed, bulked, full state, and then later you can cut. I think sometimes it's a mistake where people bulk to the top, then they immediately cut, then they immediately bulk, then they cut. And so maybe they're losing out on that fed state at the top. Next question, I've seen some people, more plates, more dates, advocate for a slow cut at first to give yourself room for lower calories later. But others recommend being aggressive in the beginning because you're in a fed state. What are the pros and cons of both? So the argument, by the way, I completely disagree. It has not been my experience. That's not how I do things. But I understand his points. The idea is that if you just crash diet, you go down to like 1,200 calories with a lot of cardio, and then you plateau later, you have nowhere left to go. I get that. I think the point is just not be that extreme. If you're cutting out like 200 calories and now you're targeting half a pound a week of fat loss, you're going to be dieting forever, and you could lose more and or lose it faster without it being difficult, right? Like if I go down to 1,000 calorie deficit, for me, that is easy when I'm in a fed state. It's easy because I can structure my diet intelligently. I increase my activity levels. My calories are not super low. So maybe at the end of a bulk, I'm just throwing some numbers out there that are probably roughly accurate. I'm probably finishing on close to 4,000 calories, and maybe my maintenance is like mid 3,000, somewhere in that, maybe slightly higher because I'm pretty active. If I go right down to 2,500 calories a day, that feels wonderful. It feels fantastic. It doesn't feel restrictive. I feel better eating 2,500 than the 4,000 or so that I was doing before. So it doesn't feel restrictive. It doesn't even result in any plateaus. The fat just evaporates very, very quickly, and it feels fantastic. On the other hand, if you're very sedentary, and let's say your maintenance is like 2,200 calories, and you go immediately to 1,200 with a whole bunch of cardio, well, yeah, that shock to the system is not going to be good. And when you do plateau or cheat on your diet, it just results in so many negative things. Maybe he's seen that happen more than I have. For me, I do emphasize keeping activity levels high, keeping in reasonable amounts of cardio, not doing anything extreme. And so if you manage things well, you can get in a pretty decent deficit without it even feeling bad at all. It might feel better. So I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying I do things differently, and I understand his points of view. This is just what I have found works for me. By the way, this video is sponsored by Boostcamp. I am happy to announce that they are going to be the long-term sponsor of the channel. They are a fitness app where you can log your progress. You can check programs from the very best creators in the industry. They have programs from Alberto Nunez, Alexander Bromley, Peter Cachetarian, myself, and much more. And they are absolutely fantastic. They put out great information. And ultimately, information is probably what is going to be the key to getting you to your goals. I myself have 2 programs up there. They are completely free. This is not a paywall situation. You can check out the programs in full on the Boostcamp app. And let me know how your progress goes. I'm excited to see your gains. All right, question 12. As someone still fairly early in their training journey, just becoming intermediate, do you think cutting can be beneficial if you've become a little fatter than you would like? I've just surpassed 20% body fat after almost a year of bulking, but I'm hesitant to sacrifice gains in the process of trimming down fat. I would say you should cut, yes. Beyond 20% body fat is probably a no-fly zone for most people, unless you're like a football lineman or something, or a strongman, or a heavyweight powerlifter or something. But I would say for most people, you don't want to go too much beyond 20% body fat. If you've been sort of maintaining that full state, yeah, I think at least once a year, cutting back down to 12% body fat is roughly 12% body fat. Could be 13, could be 11, could be 14% or so. But I think, yeah, trimming that fat off and then going back into a dedicated massing phase is probably a good idea. All right, next question. Finally starting to do some cardio after a year of lifting, mostly doing light jogging and now prepping for a 10K Spartan race. My question is whether there is an equivalent to noob gains when it comes to running, i.e., should I expect to make more dramatic improvements to my endurance early in my training? I would say yes, absolutely. In fact, I would say noob gains applies to almost any physical endeavor and a lot of mental endeavors as well. Just because you are far from whatever your hypothetical potential is, it's going to be easier to make progress. So let's say your lifetime theoretical natural mile race potential is 4 minutes and 20 seconds. If you're currently at 8 minutes and 40 seconds, yeah, you're going to make faster progress just because you make those physiological adaptations much more easily when you are untrained. And next question, have you noticed any differences in your quality of sleep and ease of falling asleep when on a cut/bulk? And his experience is that it's easier to fall asleep when a lot leaner. I'm actually the opposite. I feel like my sleep gets impacted when I'm below 10 or 11% body fat. When I start getting like veins in the middle of my abs, when I start seeing, veins in my hips and glutes start to striate, and I start seeing, really spicy looking quad feathering, all that stuff, yeah, I'll have a little bit of trouble falling asleep, like more than usual, and then I might wake up at like somewhere between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., which never happens when I'm above 15% body fat. Ever. Like the whole past year, I haven't woken up in the middle of the night once. Not once. And then it does start to happen when I get leaner. So I think this is maybe due to excess cortisol in the morning. I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps stress related, or just, your body has less energy, so it's like, hey, go and get food or something like that. But yeah, I notice sleep is a little bit worse, but it doesn't happen until 10, 11, 12% body fat, somewhere around there. Also, this is going to be a little bit different. If you cut from like 30% body fat down to 20% body fat, your sleep will probably improve, especially if you're a heavier, bigger dude. You might go from having like legit sleep apnea to being totally fine. So I think there's a sweet spot in the middle where your sleep is going to be perfect. But for me at 20, 22% body fat, I feel like my sleep is fantastic. My wife says I snore, but I feel well rested and I never wake up in the middle of the night. Or at least not that I can remember or perceive. All right, question number 9. Do you do an intentional maintenance phase after you bulk prior to cutting, or do you just jump straight from bulking into cutting? So I covered this a little bit earlier, but no, I maintain. This transition is not difficult. It's something that I don't really think about. I am more training focused, and as long as I'm not food focused, I feel like I don't really need to focus on food, if that makes sense. So when I'm in that sort of 18 to 22% zone, that's where main gaining actually is viable. The issue with main gaining is people try to do it when they're way too lean, they see no progress, and then they think they have bad genetics, or they hop on anabolics. But for most people, main gaining or maintaining or recomping is totally doable at 18 to 22% or so. For men. For women, add roughly 8 to 10% body fat to those numbers. All right, next question. Not really a question, but a suggestion. I think I speak on behalf of a lot of people and believe you should start monetizing your channel. You definitely deserve it for all the high quality content that you produce. I feel super guilty watching and I'm not contributing in that tiny way of 0.00000000000001 per ad shown on your videos. I know the revenue isn't a huge amount, but it also adds up in the long run and it's better than nothing. I probably will monetize at some point just because a lot of people have been very supportive of it. I have to find a way to link it to my bank account, which is surprisingly difficult to do. You would think that they would make it easy, but I keep getting error messages. So, if you work for Google, run over to that department and just start slapping the out of people. I don't even care if they look innocent. Just go over there and tell them to get their shit together. Again, this is how Google and YouTube make money, so you would think it would be easy. but it's surprisingly difficult to get help even with 100,000 subscribers. So Google, do better. By the way, I'm kidding about the slapping thing. Don't do that. I do not condone violence of any type. Just yell at them a little bit. All right, next question. After cutting, have you lost fat proportionally in all areas of your body? I'm strongly referring to face fat loss, as that is my biggest fear, holding me back from going full into bulking. So I've actually found that food quality does seem to be important here. You could argue that it is water retention, but I have found that in my first bulk, from 2021 to 2022, my face definitely got significantly round/chubby. And again, this could be water retention, but it wasn't transient. It was just always this fat fucking face. And then in 2022, I think I did maintain a much leaner face because my diet was better. Because I wasn't eating as much, pizza, burgers, all those sort of fun foods. And I don't even like those foods anymore. It's weird. I actually prioritize health, not because it's work or requires discipline. It's just what I prefer to do. Remember in 2022, I had pizza once, and I wasn't even disgusted myself. I was just disappointed. Because I built it up in my mind, and then I had it, and I was like, yeah, that was not worth it. So I do think keeping a so-called cleaner diet is probably a good idea here. Fat loss is going to be proportionate in different areas, but it might vary cut to cut or bulk to bulk a little bit. It is going to be fairly individual as well. Genetics probably play a role here. I am lucky that I don't get love handles. I do put fat on my abs, but I don't really put on a lot of waist size. All right, next question. How should my training change with a cut? I'm bulking/main gaining right now. Only not bulking anymore because my blood pressure got pretty high, probably because of my diet. Yeah, my blood pressure got a little bit high on the end of the bulk as well, at least higher than I would like. And when I'm done bulking, I'm wondering how I will continue my training. Will I keep the same rep schemes, mostly 5 to 8, or will I bump these up? Looking great, my dude. Thanks for everything you do. Oh, thank you. And happy to help. I don't find that the training changes very much at all. Some people increase their volume, but my response to that is why/how. I think in most cases that means you were sandbagging your training before. Not you, just you in general. So if someone is like, yeah, I took my volume from 15 sets to 20 during the cut to shred up the muscle, well, that doesn't burn very many calories, even with higher reps. Plus, if you have a lower capacity to recover because you're taking less energy and you're more stressed and you're doing cardio and more activity, if your recovery capacity is lower, why are you doing more? Right? If anything, it should either maybe maintain the same if you can, or reduce slightly. But if your volume goes up, it really does mean that you were sandbagging before. And in terms of rep range, I don't see how this would change either. Maybe you could make the argument for being slightly more risk averse when you're cutting because you're in a depleted state. I think especially if you're 5, 6, 7% body fat and you're right before a show, yeah, maybe triples on incline curls, not the best idea. And so, yeah, being a little bit more conservative could make sense. All right, question 5, do you recommend a fast bulk and cut or a gradual lean bulk over a few years with some mini cuts thrown in if body fat becomes an issue? For example, 0.2 to 0.3 kilos body weight gain per week. So typically I will go fairly fast in the bulk and fairly fast in the cut, but I realize this is not for everyone, and I think probably for most people, going a little bit slower on the bulk will allow yourself more time to bulk, and it's a little bit more reliable in terms of gains. The closer your situation is to being ideal or optimal, the faster you can go on either a bulk or a cut. So if everything is perfect, your training is amazing, you can maybe benefit from a slightly greater surplus because you are actually stimulating more muscle growth. When you're more advanced, also probably best to go a little bit slower. And then when you're cutting, if everything is ideal, you can be more aggressive with the cut because you're going to lose pure fat while maintaining your muscle, or perhaps even gaining small amounts while you are cutting. Whereas if, your sleep is bad, you're stressed out, your girlfriend just called you a butt face, whatever, yeah, you might have to be more conservative because your situation is not as perfect. Our next question, kind of an interesting one. Let's say I achieved your physique on the right, the lean one, and I never cared about gaining muscle ever again, but would be content with maintaining that physique. How would training change in order to ensure minimal appetite so I can maintain it long term? So I think this is basically what Kinobody does, because he avoids heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, working the lower body excessively, and this is because for most people, those stimulate appetite a lot. So for me, if I'm doing like a widowmaker of squats, doing 20 reps with my 10 rep max, I am ravenous after doing that. Same thing to a lesser extent with deadlifts. But for me, like just the barbell back squat especially, 4 reps with heavy weight, very stimulatory, very, very appetite increasing, probably because it is stimulatory. So you've stimulated your quads, your adductors, your glutes, to a lesser extent your hamstrings, your erectors, even your traps from holding the bar, your calves a little bit to stabilize. And so you're going to be hungry because you've stimulated a lot of muscle protein synthesis, and that requires energy. So if you don't want to build up those areas and you're happy to maintain, don't do that. I understand why, Greg O'Gallagher doesn't want to train his legs that way, because he's trying to maintain a very lean physique, which requires minimizing the appetite. It's not something that I would do, but I get it. The trouble is he usually doesn't say that is the reason, at least from what I've seen, right? He's like, don't squat heavy. And all the fanboys are like, okay, you're like, oh, I'm sold already. Our next question, when cutting, how much should one increase protein intake? And does whole food benefit the body more than a simple protein like a whey protein? So in terms of micronutrients, generally whole food is going to be much more useful, at least in terms of per protein. However, per gram of protein, right? However, often it has extra carbs or extra fats that you might not want. So yes, a juicy steak is going to have a whole lot of magnesium and zinc and other micros that is going to be very, very useful. But there's also a lot of extra energy that you might not be able to quote unquote afford during a cut. So perhaps supplementing could be useful there. Now, when cutting, should you increase your protein intake? I'm not sure. I don't tend to increase it. I have eaten tons of protein before. 250, 300, 400 grams of protein a day, and it kind of squeezes out other macronutrients. So I get more mileage from carbs than protein at a certain point. Same thing for fats. If your calories are low, let's say you're eating 1,600 calories per day, which, a lot of top natural guys, they're that low when they're cutting. Well, that's 400 grams of protein right there. So now you have no carbs, you have no fats. What are you going to eat, right? Only chicken breast? Get fucked. And even if you're only at 300 grams, well, now you have 100 grams of carbs, or 50 grams of carbs, and a handful of fats. Just at a certain point, your calories are low, and you're not getting much out of protein. So I don't know exactly how much protein I've been eating since I haven't been counting, but I would estimate it's well under 200 and probably closer to 150 grams. And yet this has probably been the best cut yet in terms of muscle retention. Alberto Nunez said the same thing, I think, recently. I'll try to find a screenshot of it. I think he was around 140, 150 grams a day of protein, and he said it was the best muscle retention that he's had as well. So I think the increase your protein thing is either a myth or maybe it's for enhanced athletes who are increasing their dosages and cycle into a show. And yeah, maybe they can benefit from that. But I think for a natural lifter, you're not going to be gaining a whole lot of muscle in a cut anyway. So you can make the argument for that you might actually need less protein, right? And up until a certain point, it's not even more satiating, right? Because you're cutting out vegetables, you're cutting out fruit, you're cutting out other things which have fiber and are probably more satiating at that point. So certainly past a gram per pound of body weight, I think more protein is probably not a great idea. It's not going to get you a ton of benefit, and you're probably squeezing out other things that could be more beneficial. All right, question number 2. It's cool how you are leaner but look bigger. When you're leaner, you will look bigger under the right lighting, especially from angles. Right now, if I get a pump and then I do a most muscular or something, or some other pose that kind of like constricts the muscles together and you can see all the details. Sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I'll look pretty ridiculous and I'll start getting fake natural accusations. Because the more details that I get, the bigger I will look under the right lighting, the right angle with the pump. But when I'm walking around in clothes, I don't feel small because I'm still 200 pounds, but I definitely fill out my clothes less than when I was, 220, 225. And the second part of the question, what should I do during a cut to ensure that I don't lose muscle? Training is going to be the key. You want to try to maintain your strength as well as maintain your volume as best you can. You have to fight against losing strength, but also realize that, especially on some lifts like the barbell bench press, you're probably going to lose strength as a natural who is losing 10% of their body weight or something like that. It's almost inevitable. So you have to fight against that, but not so much that you start making bad decisions, right? So let's say I want to maintain performance. Oh, so now I'm using like much longer recoveries. Now I'm using a different technique. Now I'm bouncing the bar just to keep the same numbers. Ironically, those will lead to less stimulation of the muscle, and you might actually lose muscle faster because you are trying to have that death grip on that performance. So do not go gentle into that good night. Rage against the dying of your bench press, but not so much that you actually shoot yourself in the foot. In terms of other things, sleep is very, very important. You also want to not do excessive amounts of cardio, which is going to be a little bit individual, depends on your work capacity, your conditioning, and how you set everything up, etc. So it's tough to give individual recommendations there without knowing you. I would say, stress is a big one, and then not having too big of a deficit. I also don't like having calories go much under basal metabolic rate. So you can find a BMR calculator. This is just an estimation, but for me, it would probably spit out, 1,800 calories, 2,000 calories, somewhere around there. And so I'm not going to go down to like 1,000 calories to try to lose weight super quickly, particularly when you're under around 10, 11%, 12% body fat for a man. So the leaner you get, the slower you have to go. It's like an airplane landing. When you're fat, you can lose fat more quickly because you have more fat to lose and you're in a fed state. But as you go into land and you're under 10% body fat, now you're under 8% body fat, you're 7%, you're 6% body fat. You have to go even more slowly because you have less fat to lose and you are in a more fragile state, and you just have to be more conservative. You might have to have more refeeds, more diet breaks, etc. And this is why the top natural bodybuilders, they take a long time to get in shape, because what is in shape now for natural bodybuilding is pretty insanely shredded. All right, question numero uno. While on a cut, would you recommend that a person A, continue training with the same amount of sets/intensity per exercise, or B, don't sweat achieving the same volume and instead cut a set from most exercises while sustaining intensity/reps? Eugene Teo did a video a bit ago on how he retains muscle on a cut while following the B option so that he has time/energy to pursue other interests. I would say maintain your volume if you can, but if you can't, don't. So I don't think he is necessarily wrong, but I do think that he diets fairly aggressively from what I've seen. By the way, he's fantastic. But I think he diets fairly aggressively. And so, yes, just sort of having the mentality of, I'm just going to chop a set off, which is going to allow me to increase or sustain the intensity/reps, I think that is completely viable. If you're not cutting as aggressively, I think trying to maintain your volume, at least at first, is probably a good idea. It also depends on where you are. A lot of people are not actually doing nearly as much volume as they could recover from. And so if you're like 25% body fat and you're a beginner and you've been doing low volume and you're like, well, I should increase my volume while I'm cutting. Well, you probably can, right? You probably can increase your volume if you were doing low volume before, and you probably can benefit from that as well. So I think it depends on your current situation, your training history, your work capacity, your recovery capacity, and what you've been doing and how far away are you from what you can actually recover from, etc. But I don't think you should have the mentality of, oh, I'm cutting, therefore my volume needs to go way down immediately. It needs to be played by ear and auto-regulated. And this is why I build auto-regulation into all my programs, all the programs that I write for people. I do think you want some play in the joints of the number of sets that you're doing. And yes, you will probably trend towards lower volume when you are cutting, especially if you are leaner, especially if you've been cutting a long time. But I don't think you should say, oh, I'm cutting now, I should just automatically drop my volume by a ton. I've seen that before, not from Eugene, but in general, someone's like, well, I'm cutting, so now I'm doing one set to failure. That is how you lose those adaptations because you're just not getting nearly as much stimulus. I hope that helped. I hope I answered your questions. Definitely check out Boostcamp if you want to not only track your progress in an awesome app, but you want to check out the best programs from some of the greatest creators and fitness minds in the industry. Also check out my book if you like this video. If you suffered through all this, you will definitely enjoy this. Also, I might as well announce this here. I'm going to be writing a book on nutrition. It's not out next week. It's not out next month. So much time and effort goes into my books that it's probably going to be like 8 or 9 months. That's how much time it takes to actually build a book. So get excited for that, but not too excited because it is a long time away. Thank you so much for the support, and thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for the questions, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.